Well, I want to welcome you to Welcome Home, which we're going to discuss the 4 keys to recruiting small group leaders. My name's Charlie Holt, and I'm the author of the Christian Life Trilogy, and with me is Alan White, and he is a consultant for small group ministry, and I'd like to let Alan White introduce himself.
Hey, Charlie, glad to be here today. I've had the privilege over the last 10 or so years to work with churches all around the country, churches of different sizes. I think probably the smallest one I've ever worked with was 40 people, and the largest was more like 40,000, but I don't think we have too many of those on the call today. But it's been interesting looking at different parts of the country, different sizes of churches, different denominations of churches, and to see how just basic principles we've learned here, how they've been applied, sometimes in a little different way in each church, but how those churches have seen success in connecting the people into groups and recruiting the leaders that they need in order to do that.
Yep. And one of the things that I'd say about Alan is that he's basically one of the main ones that taught me how to recruit small group leaders and small group hosts. And I've put into practice some of the things that we're going to be talking about on the webinar today for the last 10 years of my ministry. So I'm really grateful for Alan and can be able to share as we're going through this some of the things that we've seen at my church, which is St. Peter's Episcopal Church in Lake Mary, Florida. So without getting too much further down tangential roads, why don't we get forward and talk about what are some of the requirements when we think about leaders of small groups? What requirements are they needing to be a small group leader?
And that's a very good question, because obviously in forming groups you could have people that are interested in doing groups, but you may or may not have a group if you have a bunch of people that are prospective members. So in order to have a group, you need to have leaders, and I used to think there had to be very high qualifications for people to lead a group, because I mean honestly, I've been a pastor for 25 years. And the last thing I wanted was to set myself up to have more problems than what I was currently dealing with. So if there was somebody I didn't know well or somebody I didn't think was very well qualified, I didn't want them to lead a group because they were just going to cause problems for me. See
right.
how selfish I was?
Well, and I put some pictures up here. We have Billy Graham and Mother Teresa. I think a lot of times we think when we have leaders of small groups that they really need to have pastoral gifts or be of the kind of character of a Mother Teresa, servant's heart. Is it really, when it comes to the requirements to lead, I think one of the challenges is that if we set the bar too high, we run into problems. But if we set it too low, we could also have some problems. So let's think about some of the things that may be required to be a small group leader that are important.
Yeah, and some of these requirements we listed on the next slide here are kind of tongue-in-cheek, but it kind of makes a point. I mean, we could lower the requirement all the way to, are they breathing? And that would be a requirement anyway, because if they're not breathing, I don't know how much help they're going to be. But have some kind of evidence of their relationship with Christ, their salvation, their baptism. Do they need to be a member of the church? What level of spiritual maturity do they need to have? Do we need to train them in advance? Do we need to bring them to some kind of a briefing and give them enough to get started with and then help them along the way? Do we need a longer orientation? What kind of coaching are they going to need? And these are decisions that each church has to make for themselves. And it could be that it's, depending on the church's polity, it could be with a board of elders, it could be with other influencers in the church, but the staff, it certainly needs to be in agreement as far as who they're going to invite and what they're going to require. Now, just because some people will take anybody who wants to lead a group and put a study guide in their hands and point them in the direction of a group of people, that's not the only way that works. In fact, I've seen this work with a lot of different kinds of requirements. And so whatever you feel comfortable with, start there. And you may try some other things down the road, but start with what you're comfortable with and what feels right to you. Because especially if you're in a smaller congregation, you're taking somewhat of a risk here, and you need to be a little more sure of who you're getting before you put their names out there.
Sure. Well, and one of the things that I've noticed in my context is that it's not necessarily the case that because somebody is leading in one area of the church that they're going to make the best small group facilitator or host. And so sometimes we actually overlook people that are just, in a sense, sitting in the pews of the church or sitting in the chairs of the congregation who just are church attenders and maybe haven't gotten involved in anything else, but are actually going to be great small group facilitators and hosts. And sometimes when we set the bar too high, we overlook some of our best talent to be small group hosts and facilitators.
And I would agree with that, because you don't necessarily want someone who's a leader that can line them up and get them to march. That's not really what you're looking for. You're looking for someone who is relationally warm, someone that's caring, someone who's hospitable. You don't really even need to have someone that has teaching gifts, because they'll sit them in rows and they'll lecture them for the group time.
That's
and
correct.
We already have a wonderful teacher on this series, and his name is Father Charlie Holt. And so we don't need somebody else to teach, because that actually does fill that need. We need somebody who's able to be friendly, to be inviting, to be warm, and then can just ask the questions. And they don't have to have all the answers. They just have to ask the questions.
Correct. And I think so often when we create too high of a bar, we actually limit the number of groups that we can have, because one of the rules that we try to accomplish is 100% of our average Sunday attendance in small groups. And we actually once set a goal in our church of having 4 times our average Sunday attendance in the small groups. And what we discovered is that when you set the goal that high, that means that half of your households in your congregation need to host a small group. Well, that means that you need to really actually lower the requirements that you might have, so that pretty much anybody in your congregation could actually be a host of a small group. And that's the way we looked at it for that particular campaign, which was a 40 Days of Purpose from Rick Warren.
Yeah, and you really have to prepare for what you're expecting God to do in your church. And so if you're content with having 2 leaders, then what you're saying is, I'm expecting God to give us 20 or 25 people to fill up these 2 groups. But when you begin to say, I want to see every adult that attends on a regular basis, or like you said, your Easter attendance, or reaching out into the community with this, then you need to prepare for that as well. And so recruit as many leaders as you possibly can, and be prepared for that, because otherwise, you're going to have no place to send people. The other thing that happens is, as you recruit people to lead, they'll begin to think about their friends and others that they know who they'd like to invite to be part of the group. And I don't mean that we would create something that would be cliquish, but rather we would create something where there's some familiarity with each other going in. So maybe the person that's going to lead the group invites a few friends, and then they invite a few friends, and so they may not all be connected to the leader, but at least you have friends of friends of friends, and then you have a few other people that sign up at church, and before you know it, you have a group.
Yeah, and one of the things that's kind of neat when you start to build some momentum and you are doing something in a sense that's kind of big for your congregation, and they're not used to doing something big, people get excited about it, and they start telling their neighbors and their friends and their family members, and the next thing you know, some of that contagion and enthusiasm starts to spread to people outside of your congregation, and they want to join with you. And this happened actually with the most recent campaign that we did, the Crucified Life. We had one of our members that told her brother-in-law about it. Well, he was a chaplain in a prison. And so he was not a member of our church, but he got excited about the course and the materials, and hosted not just one small group, but 4 small groups in the Zephyr Hills prison for 40 of the prisoners in the prison. And so, you know, sometimes I think when we create our standards, we can sometimes limit what the kingdom of God might have in store for us, and some of the amazing evangelistic opportunities and opportunities for God to do some pretty special things in us and through us. So what is the magic formula, Alan? You have here the sweet spot.
You got to have your sweet spot. Now, if you lower the requirements, you're definitely going to have far more people involved in groups. However, if you lower your requirements, you may experience what you feel like is a higher risk in allowing people to lead groups. And so the sweet spot, I would say, is this: to have the maximum results, so to get as many groups as possible within what you're willing to risk. Now, for some people, it may be a matter of they've never done this before. They want to recruit, handpick a dozen people to help start groups. And if that's what's safe for you, then do that. For others, they may say, you know what, let's go with the breathing qualification. Anybody who wants to get these materials and get some people together, let's go for it. But the reality is this: I think it's human nature that we don't want to create something that's more risky than what we'll actually tolerate. And I think the next slide kind of says this: that the leadership team, the pastors of a church, need to decide what would be an acceptable level of risk. If it's too risky, you might actually want to see that fail, because if you feel like it's too risky and it succeeds, well, now you've received exactly what you feared. Who wants that?
That's correct.
and I don't want to get into all the psychology of how we may sabotage ourselves and not seeing those goals reached, but I think there's a place there. But if you're not risky enough, you could be leaving some people out that you wouldn't have, considered. I know back in my early days, I guess I have to admit, hi, my name's Alan, and I'm a recovering control freak. I handpicked all of my leaders because I didn't want any problems, like I said before. And so it was a big day for me when I was sitting with my small group team, and one of my team members, his name's Carlos, spoke up, and he said, he said, I was talking to Rick this weekend. He said, Rick is so excited about his group. He says it's the best thing he's ever done. And he's just really excited about what the series is going to do. And I looked at Carlos, I said, who's Rick? I'd never met Rick. I'd never seen Rick. I couldn't have picked Rick out of a lineup, so I certainly wouldn't have recruited him. And I thought to myself later, wow, shame on me. If I would have kept such high control on this, that I would have kept Rick from the best thing that he'd ever done. It's like, oh man. But I have to admit, it took me a while to get to that realization. That wasn't my first time around.
That's right. Well, and the other thing is, we tend to pick our go-to people when we pick the leaders. Mm-hmm. And God's got some go-to people that we may not have in mind. And so if we can get a little bit of acceptance of risk and take some steps of faith, we may find that the Lord will raise up people like the Ricks in our life. So that really is the key. Number one key for us is to actually lower the bar that you may have of who is qualified to be a small group leader. And it's counterintuitive a little bit, but what you're wanting to do is lower the bar so that you actually can reach more people. We love this quote. You want to read that one, Alan?
Yeah, and Neil Cole said this. He said, we need to lower the bar on what it means to be a leader and raise the bar on what it means to be a disciple. Because, we're all called to go and make disciples. And so, where is that balance for us? And this actually helped me in my thinking. I had a friend of mine I had dinner with one night that told me that some of the most unlikely people will make some of the best group leaders. And you think of all kinds of exceptions and all kinds of bizarre things that could happen. Now, obviously, if you have a person in your congregation and you've already thought about that person, but it would be like your greatest fear for them to lead a group. Right. You may want to figure out some way to head that off at the pass, or if they sign up, just to gently approach them and say, what are you considering? and maybe talk them out of it if you know it's going to be a bad experience. But over the years I've discovered that even people that we would consider to be crazy, the crazy people have a unique ability to minister to and serve other crazy people. But that's not the majority of our congregations. Those are the exceptions, and we need to allow the exceptions to be the exceptions, because the vast majority of our people are going to be good, solid people that are they're going to follow the instructions, they're going to do this exactly right, and they're not going to cause you a bit of trouble.
That's right. And if you just look at the kind of people Jesus picked and recruited, tax collectors, fishermen, these are people, they will get more fishermen. If you have fishermen on your team, you're going to get more fishermen. If you have tax collectors, you'll be able to recruit tax collectors. And some of these people were not the most desirable people, but they actually became quite effective for ministry because they related to other people. So let's talk about strategy a little bit. On this, in one way, there's a traditional way that small groups have often been implemented in the life of a congregation. And that model often is we get well-qualified leaders that are recruited, we train them up and make sure that they've had, weeks and weeks and weeks of training, that they're well-coached and under an accountability structure, and then we handpick who's going to be in each one of those groups. And I think this old model or old strategy is being replaced with a new strategy that is actually more effective in reaching more people for the Lord. It's not to say that if this is the model that's in your church, that's necessarily a bad thing. But if you want to expand your reach and get more people engaged in the life of your ministry, you may want to rethink your model and your strategy a little bit.
Yeah, I would actually look at these strategies as almost being a good, better, best, because we're going to talk about 3 different strategies.
Okay.
But, the people that are listening to this webinar, they may actually begin to think of this as worse, worser, and worsest. And so we don't want to go that direction. But if you would, the traditional model for most churches will get them to maybe about 30% of their adults connected into groups. And you are looking for well-qualified leaders. You are having to vet them pretty thoroughly. But it's a safe place to start if you're advertising groups, if you're sending people to groups that you know these people very well, and you know that if you're sending someone to their group, it would be a good situation. Now, the other option here, too, is not just the 3 that we're going to go through, but actually to kind of do a bit of all of the above. Because there may be some people, some key influencers in your congregation, kind of those E.F. Huttons. That takes us back a few years, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And so you may just want to tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, I need you to do one of these groups. And they may not have thought of it. They'll be flattered that you ask. But this is definitely something, you should consider, at least to the minimum. And at least to get, a third of your congregation into groups, this is a great way to go.
That's right. Well, and I think also a lot of it depends on the discipleship model and method that you're working on. Certainly, there are discipleship models and methods that look for taking people really deep and with a controlled process and that sort of thing. And I think if that's what you're trying to accomplish, sometimes going with some of these other strategies may not be a great fit. But if you're wanting to reach a larger group of people, then losing some of that control, and that's kind of a theme of today. So what's the host home strategy?
This started back out of Saddleback Church for the 40 Days of Purpose, and I'm sure everybody's heard of the Purpose-Driven Life, best-selling religious book of all time, short of the Bible. And so this was something they came up with kind of on the eve of the 40 Days of Purpose. The team there with Rick Warren decided, rather than inviting people to lead groups, they would invite people to host groups. And so the idea was we're going to take a little bit of the fear out. You don't have to be a Bible expert. You don't have to be a leader per se. But if you could invite people, if you would open up your home and be hospitable, then we're going to help you get a group started. And so you would recruit these hosts. They'd sign up on a card and put it in the offering, or sign up online, however that would work best for you. And then give them some kind of a briefing. Give them some kind of information to get them started. And this is usually a one-time thing. This isn't like ongoing training. That would actually come in later. But the idea is that the host, first of all, they would invite some people that they knew to the group. And what I used to say out in California was, to my host was, if I were you, I'd go ahead and invite my friends to the group. Otherwise, you might end up with a bunch of crazy people. And nothing against crazy people, but they got my message. Now, moving to South Carolina, I could never say that here, but I could tell the story about California, and the people in South Carolina knew exactly what I meant. But the other idea would be whether you're going to advertise the groups, whether you're going to have people sign up on cards and place them into groups, or even have an opportunity like a small group fair where all of the groups would be represented, and after a service, the people would go out into a lobby or a patio and sign up to be in a specific group. Considering Lent starts at the beginning of February, they may not want to be outside, depending on where you live. But that's kind of the idea of the host strategy. So you may have some people that you don't know coming to be part of your group, as well as inviting people that you do know. Right.
And I've used this particular strategy to great effect. And I think part of one of the things that makes it a really easy thing to use in announcement times or any other communication that you would get out to your congregation is you can actually use the word host as an acrostic. And so what I often do is say H is having a heart for other people. So you have to care about people. And so basically use the word as an acrostic for the qualifications. So H, you have to have a heart for others. O, you have to be willing to open up your home. S, serve something simple. And T, turn on your DVD player. In this case, back when Rick Warren was doing it, was turn on your VCR, which very few of us have those anymore. And now it might be turn on your computer and live stream it. But the other way I've heard the T used is tell a few friends. And that could be used to invite some other people. And I've used it both ways, and it works fine. And one of the best illustrations that I use from the Bible is the story of Mary and Martha, where Jesus shows up with 12 friends to Martha's house, and Martha is willing to open up her home. And the problem with Martha, and this is the problem and the biggest barrier for people who have the gift of hospitality. And they are the best people to be small group hosts, or people with the spiritual gift of hospitality. But they begin to worry about all the details of having people in their home. And that's where I really emphasize the S as serve something simple, so that people don't get overwhelmed with all the details. And you remember Jesus said to Martha, 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 you're worried about all these things. But look at what's happening in your sister Mary's life, because I'm here and she's able to sit at my feet and learn. And that's really what it's all about, Martha. And so it's connecting the Marthas in your congregation back to the H of host. Have a heart to see what can happen in the lives of your sister, your brother, your coworker, your neighbor, your friend, and invite them over to your home. And don't worry about the 4-course meal. In fact, if you serve a 4-course meal, it'll be too much and everybody will feel uncomfortable and overwhelmed. Just serve water, bottled water, or some cookies or crackers, and then turn on the DVD, ask the questions, and it's going to go great. Jesus will do the work. And that's one of the ways that I've used that, and it's been very effective.
Martha, Martha, Martha. All right. So, and then the last way, and the host strategy I've seen in a lot of churches I've worked with, will get maybe 2/3 of their members in groups, sometimes 75%. Some people are exceptional, like St. Peter's, and get 75 groups, but that's exceptional. And but it's a good way to start. And again, it allows people to self-select as leaders. The other way, and this is kind of a more recent trend we've seen, is the idea of allowing people to basically offer to get together with their friends and do a study. And so the thought is we're actually inviting people to host a group, but we're not using the word host and we're not using the word group. We're saying, would you get together with your friends and do a study? And so in this, you're not sending people to these groups. You're not advertising these groups. None of that is happening. You're just asking people if, if a traditional method of doing a group is not fitting for them, or maybe they have some lifestyle issues, could be an odd job schedule, could be special needs children, it could be that they have trouble getting around, that something smaller would accommodate that, and they could get together with people that they already know. And so this has actually gone a very long way. I've seen churches, recruit 25% of their members to lead groups like this. And it's not to be in groups like this, to lead the groups like this, and then they have to go find the people. Well, pretty soon, your congregation is kind of picked over and everybody's taken. So then how do you fill up the rest of the groups? Well, then they have to go to friends and neighbors and coworkers and other people who would enjoy or benefit, maybe people that haven't attended church in a while, maybe, relatives, and invite them to come and be a part of the group. But it offers a lot of flexibility. Some congregations deal with, people that commute, and so they need to have, a few people that can meet with them over a lunch break at work. Some people travel, so you have to deal with, even here in Greenville, I tried to set a meeting with some of my leaders. Oh, I'm going to be in Beijing that week. Well, what about the next week? Oh, I'm going to be in Paris. And I thought, who are these people? We live in Greenville, South Carolina, for Pete's sake.
One of the things that I've tried this strategy too, and I found that it works really well. But I put together some, I call them grab and go bags. Actually, I used a little in Panera's bread. I saw that they have a you pick two, where you can pick two items off the menu and combine them. So I created little bags that had basically 3 sets of materials that would be out after the service that somebody could just grab that, and I said, you pick 2 friends that you would like to do this with. And that is a great way, and several of the people took us up on that offer. And that was something I actually tagged at the end of our last recruiting thing. I just did that the last 2 Sundays before we launched our campaign, just to see if there maybe were some people that maybe were a little overwhelmed with the idea of being a part of a large group that had maybe 10 people or 12 people. But, Jesus said, where 2 or more are gathered, I'm in the midst of you. So being in a small group of 3 people or 4 people is fine. Even if it was just 2 people spending some time together, going through a study together, that's better than not participating or not doing it. And I think that opened it up for some people that wouldn't have participated otherwise, and they were able to step up and get involved in a way that was really great.
And you can actually use all 3 of these strategies together. That prior to even recruiting, let's say that your church needs, 30 groups in order to achieve your goals. Well, prior to even recruiting, you might want to go ahead and invite 15 people, hand pick them, like we did in the good slide, and then for a couple of Sundays, invite people to open up their homes and host groups, and do that for a couple of Sundays. And then at the tail end of that, I've actually had pastors stand up and say, some of you at this point, you haven't found any groups. Some of you don't even like our group. So we want to challenge you to go get the materials, find a couple of friends, do the study on your own, and start your own group.
That's right. And one of the things that we put in the materials that I produced, the Christian Life Trilogy, is by the time you get to the 2nd or 3rd session, it actually encourages the people that are in the group to begin to be thinking about and praying about friends, family, coworkers, and so on, the people in the various circles of your life who you might want to be praying about and thinking about inviting to be a part. And so the groups actually will grow from 2 or 3 people if people begin to take those challenges that are actually in the material seriously. And we've had people join my personal small group in the last 2 or 3 sessions of the series, and they have been tremendous contributions to the group. And so, my wife and I's group is always an open group, and even if somebody just comes for the last one of a session, we're glad that they're there, and hey, maybe they'll be part of the next thing that we do. And it's always a blessing to bring and meet new people. So we're on to keys 2 and 3. What would you say those are?
I don't know if I missed the slides or not. I was going to tag one more thing on there is going back to the idea of risk. Is if you're not sure about this, sometimes it's riskier to present groups to your congregation for people to sign up for than it is for people to go out and gather their own groups. Because if you're presenting them, if you're advertising the groups in any way, there's an expectation that the church has put their endorsement, has put their blessing on them. Whereas if people are going and doing a study with their friends, they know their friends, so they know what they're getting. But you're not sending anybody to those groups, so you maybe don't have to know them quite as well. Yeah, the other keys, and these are big pieces, they come in different ways, and that would be to offer enough training to get them started. I used to recruit leaders, and then I would put them through training, and then if they survived my training, then I would let them go ahead and launch a group. But give them enough to get started. So what do they need to understand? They need to understand how to gather a group. They need to understand, what the curriculum is about, how to use it, when to use it. And I always like to see the hosts trained in how to share responsibilities with other people. So you're not having to prepare refreshments every week. You're maybe not even having to lead the discussion every week. And it gives a little more sense of an ownership. Now, Charlie, what are some things that you've done as far as preparing groups through training?
We usually have a host rally, and basically it's a one-time deal where we invite all the hosts to come. That would be the night when they would pick up their materials. We do some prayer during that training to just kind of set us in the right frame of mind and call upon the Lord to help us with helping us fill our groups, helping us to accomplish the things that He would have accomplished in our groups. And then we might give them some tips on some of the things that they could do. So we offer them training on how to find people to be a part of their group, and we go through a little exercise called the 5-circle exercise, which gets the brain cells going about who they might be able to invite and pray about inviting to their group. And then I also always encourage the hosts to not be teachers, but to be facilitators, and to make sure that they let them use the questions. Not to be, you have to be kind of just discerning, because in a lot of studies like the one that I wrote too, there are a lot of different questions, and so you just kind of have to go through, ask some questions, encourage people. But I really want to encourage our hosts to not to put too much pressure on the participants in the group. But the goal is to get people talking, and so people will say things that maybe might be controversial, or get people where you'd want to correct their doctrine or their teaching. And instead, what I would say is, let the materials teach, and you be there to be a facilitator. And you can always say, that's an interesting point, and that doesn't affirm what they said, but you are affirming them as a person. So you say, that's interesting. Maybe some other people have some ideas about that. And then maybe that gives a person that's also in the group an opportunity to share a different perspective that might be a better one. So that's the way discussions get going, is people share their opinions and differences of opinion. And you can really get to some deeper places if you'll just encourage the discussion. That's the main thing. And the other thing I always tell our people is, don't pressure people to go spiritually further than they are ready to go themselves. So I say don't encourage people to like single Alan, would you say the opening prayer for us tonight? And I don't know Alan, and I don't want to scare that scares Alan. Alan might go, I've never prayed before in my life. let people try out the Christian disciplines on their own and step into that when they're ready, rather than pressure and putting them on the spot. So those are some of the things, just little tips like that. The other thing I would say is that, and this is the case with my curriculum, the Christian Life Trilogy, but we put a lot of on-the-job training for hosts in the curriculum itself. So in the DVD, you'll actually have a leadership lifter that gives some tips to leaders before the session. And so if the session hosts are watching those leadership lifters, they're going to pick up on some good things to do for group dynamics. And then also in the printed study guides and materials, we also give a lot of good tips and encouragement on how to facilitate a small group. So I always encourage our group leaders to watch those leadership lifters and to read some of those tips and guidelines that are in the materials themselves.
Yeah, and you want to give them enough information that they feel prepared, but you don't want to overwhelm them with information, because there are all kinds of things that can happen in their group. You can say, well, you might have somebody who talks too much, and this is how you handle that. And you may have people that are flaky and they don't show up, and this is how you handle that. And you may have somebody that shows up and they're a drug addict, and this is how you handle that. And you may have somebody in your group that goes through a divorce, and you may have somebody in your group that dies. I mean, there's all kinds of things that can happen, but more than likely, those things aren't going to happen during the 6 weeks of a study. So don't scare them. Don't tell them every possible horror story that could happen. Otherwise, they'll go running from the room, maybe running from your church. So you want to give them enough so that they can get started without overwhelming them. The other thing that you want to do for them is to have a mature person that's willing to coach them. And this doesn't necessarily have to be someone with experience in small groups. In fact, I've had churches that have said, you know, do we recruit established small group leaders? Do we recruit staff members? Who do we use to coach? And the requirement really comes down to this. You want to find people who actually care.
That's right.
They'll pick up the phone, because from when that person signs up to lead a group, or when they sign up, or when they come out of that the original training, that initial training, from that point until the series starts is the biggest opportunity for that group to fail. And they'll get discouraged. They'll invite a few people. The people will maybe turn them down, you know, or they'll just think, well, I acted on an impulse, and I don't think this is a very good idea right now, and I don't really have time. And, you know, and we have an enemy that doesn't want to see any of this succeed. But sometimes it's having a coach that's going to pick up the phone and is going to say, how you doing? And they're going to say, well, I invited 5 people this week, and 2 of them said they were already in another group, and 2 of them said Tuesday night wouldn't work, and the other one said that they're not really even my friend. And so I think I made a mistake. And so the coach would encourage them, say, let's pray. I don't think it's a bad idea. I don't think it's a wrong idea for you to do this, but let's pray about who God would have to be in your group, and then pay attention, you know, as far as who crosses your path, because we pray and ask God for something. We need to expect that God's going to answer our prayer, right?
Absolutely.
And but to have that person, or if there is something that comes up in a group and they're just feeling like, man, I don't know how to handle this. This person's answering every question that goes out there. Then they have somebody checking in on them and says, how's your group going? Well, I've got this person that's dominating the discussion. Well, let's talk about some ways to handle that particular situation.
One of the things that we did with this particular series is, and this was an idea that came out of our leadership team. I didn't even come up with this good idea, but we had a prayer warrior that was a prayer champion, and what she wanted to do was assign somebody to be praying for each group, and occasionally check in with the groups as a way of offering prayer support. Hey, how can I be praying for you as you're hosting this group in your home? And that was one of the most meaningful supports that we could offer, is for our group hosts to know that there was a specific person that was assigned to praying for them through the campaign and through the process, and that just means a lot. So I think this might have been a slide you were looking for earlier when we were talking about you know, when a person invites their friends, you feel more comfortable as a leader than if people are placed in groups. If you're placing people in groups, then yeah, you may be wanting somebody a little more highly qualified that you feel good about them being in that role in somebody's life. But when it's one person inviting another person into their home, that's something that takes some of the risk pastorally out of the equation.
Yeah, and I jokingly say that if somebody comes to you and says, hey, my friend invited me to this small group, they're not a very good leader. In fact, I don't even think they know what they're doing. And this is a really terrible group. I've had just such a bad experience. Then I would just smile at them and say, well, you know, I didn't place you in that group. It's your friend, so it's kind of on you. Now, I've never had that conversation with anybody, but that's kind of the thought of it. Whereas if you are sending somebody to the group, you need to know what's going on with them. And sometimes it's just as simple as having them fill out a brief application, ask about their relationship with Christ, ask about, you know, how long they've been part of the church, maybe even ask if there's anything going on in their life that would harm or embarrass the church or the cause of Christ. And I've had people that were going through relationship problems and they needed pastoral care, but it wasn't the right time for them to be leading a group. Or I've had people that were struggling with life-controlling problems that, again, they needed care and support in their journey, but they didn't need the distraction of leading a group. And that's not to say that, oh, you're disqualified because you're not good enough to do this, because I just said we needed to lower the bar. But I don't ever want somebody to get the impression that as a church, we're more interested in what people can do for us than we are interested in them and what they're going through and what they're dealing with and how can we minister to them and serve them.
Correct, and I think one of the neat things that just happens when you do have a more organic small group program that is involving a lot of people, is that when you have challenging situations that come up in a small group, that's where that coaching, that ongoing coaching and support really comes into its own, because those if they're ignored if you don't have somebody coaching and checking in on your groups, when you have a problem like that and it's ignored, that can be a challenge or a dangerous thing. But if it's something where the small group host feels supported and that coach maybe even raises the awareness level all the way up to the pastor or senior leadership of the church, then they know, hey, we can get through this because we're supported by you, and then that challenge becomes an opportunity for some tremendous pastoral care and rallying, and that's where amazing transformation begins to take place in a small group ministry. But it is about that third key that we talked about, that coaching structure. So my story here is actually Alan's story. You want to talk about this?
Yeah, your story is my story. I mean, you have another story. No, and I'll just state this briefly. When we started out, I had this 5-year plan of how to get everybody in my church connected into a group, and it was a very high control system. MetaChurch, some of you may have heard of, was originated by my friend Carl George. But I personally recruited, I trained, I coached all of our leaders. We got to about 30% in groups, and we got stuck. And so I knew by the time I was 7 years into my 5-year plan that this wasn't working as well as I thought. And that wasn't anything against the plan. It was the way I was working it. So then we moved from that. We kept those groups the way they were. And then we went to a host home strategy where we did a church-wide campaign similar to what we're describing here. And I invited, the senior pastor invited, rather not me. Senior pastor stood up and asked if people were interested in opening up their homes and doing one of these groups as Charlie had described earlier. And we saw our groups go from 30% of our people connected to 60% of our people connected in groups. And that took the span of one day. And it took 7 years to get to 30%. And one day we doubled it. And then from there, we saw, the host home was working a little more as we went. But then we thought this idea of, if you want to get together with your friends and do a study and grow together, then that's really where we went from 60% in groups to having more people in groups than what we had as regular attenders on the weekend. Now, some of that is, it's not funny, Pastor Math. Not everyone attends every Sunday. But then we also had a lot of friends, neighbors, coworkers, relatives that were participating in our small groups, and they had never darkened the door of our church, or they hadn't been to church in a very long time. And that was a really, really cool thing to see.
Absolutely. I mean, when you start getting to the level of 100% of your average attendance in small groups, those small groups actually become engines of evangelism. And you're reaching into the community, you're reaching into families. We just went through the Christian Life Trilogy, and we had 3 small group series all in a row with the Crucified Life, the Resurrected Life, and the Spirit-Filled Life. Well, at the end of the series, the Holy Spirit-Filled Life, the third session, I just recently received letters from 3 wives whose husbands have really come to the faith through the small groups. And these are men that were not church attenders, but they actually did get connected to the church through the small group. And a couple of them have now started coming to regular worship. And that's the kind of thing that I love seeing, but it's easier sometimes for people to cross the threshold of a home than it is to cross the threshold of the church building. And so the evangelistic power of small groups is wonderful. And then the other thing that you start to see happening is the ecumenical thing, where people are part of other congregations, and those friends that they have invited them over. They may never become members of your church, but you're actually blessing other churches and helping to raise up leadership in other congregations, and you're getting just this momentum with the body of Christ that can happen across denominations, across different local churches, and that also is just really great stuff when that begins to happen, when those relationships are built. So what I want to think about is the last key, which is the senior pastor as the senior recruiter. Now, why is this a key, Alan?
Well, one of the things that I learned, and I tend to learn things the hard way, but at least I learned them, right? And so after 7 years of personally recruiting leaders myself, when I saw my senior pastor stand up on the weekend and invite people to do groups, and we doubled our groups in a day, I never recruited another small group leader since then. I served in another church. I've coached, a lot of churches, and I've never encouraged them to recruit, but to have the senior pastor, because just purely from a leadership perspective, the senior pastor is God's designated leader in the church.
That's right.
So the expectation is that the senior pastor, whatever you call your senior pastor, is hearing from God and is leading the people. And so the people are going to follow his leadership or her leadership in that situation. And so, the pastor has the most, the loudest voice, if you will, in the congregation.
Sure.
And so it is going to be respected in that regard. And it's much different than if I, as associate, stood up and made the same invitation, I would have 30% the result than if my senior pastor stood up and said the exact same words. That's
right. And I think I've been a senior pastor in our denomination. We call it the rector of the church. The Episcopal Church has all kinds of fancy names and titles.
I knew there was another name.
Yeah.
I was going to say vicar, but that's Anglican.
Yeah, the rector of the church, which but what we've found is that, yeah, that's right, that it's my job to cast vision and to make sure I call the entire congregation to things at various times. And sadly, I think most senior pastors will really only call their entire congregation to something big when it's like a capital fund drive, when it involves money. And so when a senior pastor steps up there and calls the congregation to a discipleship challenge of let's get everybody in the congregation involved in this particular program or this small group study, or let's really try to make this goal in connectedness and fellowship, that if it comes out of that senior pastor's awareness of the congregation, what they need is a flock, as he's the shepherd. The sheep know the voice of the shepherd, and the shepherd knows the needs of the sheep. And he alone uniquely can speak to the larger group and people that are there and really connect, because number one, he knows all the people and they know him, and that relationship is very powerful. And it shouldn't just be used for capital campaigns. It should be used for making disciples and connecting the fellowship of the body. So, senior pastors, don't underestimate your role. If you're on the call, make sure that you know that how important you are, and don't be afraid to use that authority that God's given you to raise up leaders. And if you're a person that is like Alan was, working for on a church staff, or you're a lay leader, get that senior pastor engaged in some way, and help them catch the vision, and encourage them. Don't criticize them, but encourage them to step up and be bold for the Lord. So this one last point about recruiting, and when a senior pastor steps up and makes a challenge, I think this is an important point. When you're recruiting people, you don't want to make a lot of extra steps, but keep the connection of asking to signing up right together. So don't send them to the website. Don't send them to some kind of meeting or an information desk. Collect the card right in the service.
Yeah, definitely, because here's the thing. I'm very practical about this. Most people only think about church when they're at church. And as soon as the service is over, they're headed to their car, their heads and their stomachs have already gone to the restaurant, and they're not going to think about going home and logging onto the computer and signing up for something. That would be a very efficient method. But what I would advise is this: you put a simple card in the bulletin, in the program on Sunday morning, and at some point say, everyone received
something like
this
this.
Card. Yeah, everybody received a card when you came in. I want you to get it out. I want you to hold it up. Now, if that's too charismatic, then just hold it up this high. But anyway, I want you to hold it up, and if you're interested in opening up your home, or if you're interested in gathering your friends, then just basic contact information: their name, their email, their phone number. I don't know that you have to ask their zip code, and then mark on that card. If this church chose to call them facilitators, host, leader, whatever you want to call it, and then maybe have a couple of days and times on there where you're going to offer your briefing and have them indicate which briefing, and collect this in the service. So for some churches, they could actually put this in the offering. For some churches, they would hand this to an usher on the way out the door. But you don't want to rely on people remembering, go put this in a box in the lobby, or put a stamp on it and mail it in. None of that. You really want to keep the invitation and the response as close together as you possibly can, and that will give you the best result by far.
Excellent advice. I agree completely. We're just going to wrap up here. We only have a few minutes left, but I want to just give a brief commercial for the program that I've mentioned a few times during the course of the webinar. This is the Christian Life Trilogy. It's a 3-part small group study that basically has 20 weeks of material. 20 weeks of material that are available to you, but that's divided up into smaller segments. So the first series is called The Crucified Life. It's got 7 weeks of material, and then there's the Resurrected Life and the Spirit-Filled Life. And what I want to encourage you to think about is using these materials during the season of Lent, Easter, and then sometime like a fall campaign following Pentecost. And they're designed and written to align the heart of the Christian church year with the heart of the gospel and the heart of the Christian faith. And they take the participants in the congregation on a journey into a deeper relationship with the Lord through asking them to die to self first, that they might be raised with Jesus Christ and ultimately filled with the Holy Spirit of God. The Apostle Paul said it best when he said, "I want you to remember the things of first importance, that Jesus Christ died and then 3 days later was raised from the dead." The things of first importance have to do with the cross, the resurrection, and the outpouring of the Holy Spirit. And so we have a campaign kit that is a great way to get started with that. It's on the Christian Life Trilogy website. We will send out a link to those who have been on the call, and we'll offer a special of $99 to buy the campaign kit if you'd like to. And there are leadership training materials in there that you can use to train your teams, good tips and ideas on how to recruit teams, and also training for your hosts. So when you recruit your hosts, there's a video that you can play at your host rally to help train them and give them some tips. We also are launching just this week a coaching cohort led by Alan White. And so we'll send out an email related to that as well, and invite you to be a part of that. Now that one does have a sense of urgency to it, in that that coaching cohort launches on November 5th. And so there'll be a deadline of when you can register for that, and that's just because we want to get people started in time to launch this small group series by Lent. So Alan has a tremendous amount of experience coaching. How many churches do you think you've coached at this point, Alan?
You know, it's hard to say. It's over 1,000, I know.
Yeah. And one of them was St. Peter's Episcopal Church in Lake Mary, Florida, and I've learned...
We did pretty good.
That's right, we did good. So I am so grateful to have him coaching for us with the Christian Life Trilogy, and I hope that if that's something that you need as a little extra support, that you'll sign up to be a part of that. And what we've done is tried to make it reasonable for smaller churches, so we have one price point for small churches, and then we have we'll charge a little bit more for churches that are over the size of 400 average Sunday attendance. So take a look at both of those opportunities, and you may find something that you get excited about. And thank you for participating in this webinar on how to host or how to recruit hosts for small group campaigns. And thank you, Alan.
You're welcome. Thank you, Charlie.
Hi, my name's Charlie Holt, and I'm the pastor of St. Peter's Church and the author of the Christian Life Trilogy. Over the years, I've had a hunger to see solid small group materials developed in and around the core faith of our church, found in the gospel of Jesus Christ. The Apostle Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, "For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures, that He was buried, and that He was raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures." The Christian Life Trilogy seeks to focus on the things of first importance: the crucified life, the resurrected life, and the Spirit-filled life. To explore what it means to walk the way of the cross, to be raised with Christ in newness of life, and to be filled with all the fullness of the Spirit of God. As a pastor, every year I'm asking myself, what am I going to do for Lent this year? Listen to the impact the Crucified Life materials have had on those who participated during Lent.
I think very often you look at the empty cross. You look at just the season of Lent, here we go, another year. This gave people an opportunity to go deeper and to really find out, what does this mean? How does this apply to my life? What does this mean for my depth of spirituality?
To think of what Jesus was going through, it just made the Easter experience, the entire Easter experience, the most profound one I've ever had.
The average Christian, when he thinks about the last 7 phrases that Christ said on the cross, may take them at face value. But when we find out from this session on the crucified life, the meaning behind those words and how it applies to us, it definitely matures you as a Christian in a very strong way. I look at things totally different than I did before.
I think the crucified life really went to a place in people's lives where they're longing, but maybe don't even know they need. I've heard over and over again how God's touched people's lives and brought them to a deeper level of faith and intimacy with Christ through this Crucified Life series, and how our church as a community went through it together.
What you've just heard is the transformational power of the first study in the trilogy, The Crucified Life, 7 Words from the Cross. The entire Christian Life trilogy is a 20-week journey into the heart of the gospel and the heart of the Christian life. These 3 studies are not only deeply theological in their intent and purpose, but also deeply practical as they call us to be transformed into the image and likeness of God through His Son, Jesus Christ.
Within just a couple of weeks, people were really sharing some of their biggest challenges, some of the toughest things that they're going through, and then I'm watching other people in my group literally just wrap their arms around them, pray for them, and get involved in their lives, and that stuck and still sticks to this day. So that was, I think, what we needed, and that's what God did through the material.
God is calling the church back to His heart, and you're invited to be a part of that by participating in the Christian Life Trilogy church-wide campaign. I hope this resource will bring tremendous renewal to the church, your congregation, and to you personally. My prayer is that the Lord will bring all of our hearts back to the things of first importance as we walk the way of the crucified life, the resurrected life, and the Spirit-filled life.